Nigel Mitchell asks, to what extent is it possible for somebody to control the riff of their mojo that they give off, specifically the game playing style?
That's a great question. There are three main types of riffs: the physiological, the gameplay style, and also the developmental riffs. And you can all of these you can control to a certain extent beyond your natural powers. For the physiological cues, so you'll have ones that just come naturally to you, you have more access to or come out naturally, but you can actually control it, by taking on certain clothes, different clothes, grooming rituals, different grooming rituals. You can actually step outside of your normal physiological riffs and explore other ones. With the gameplay style, again, you'll have your natural pathways, natural style of playing and natural process. But one good way of stepping outside of that, your normal riffs or natural riffs, would be to study someone that has a gameplay style that you admire or want to experiment with, and look at them and study them, and then you'll start taking on those different gameplay styles, by observing them and seeing how they do things and how. And then you start embodying it yourself, and you can sort of step outside of your normal range that way, and start going into other waters as far as gameplay style. Then you have the developmental riffs. With the developmental riffs, it's kind of like developing metaphysical muscles, like an athlete. So the best way to change or explore those other developmental riffs will actually be to do the activities that will cause that development to come up. So, for example, if you want to increase your debating development, then you would that debating muscle. Then you would actually want to go and try out debating and work on that, and then over time that metaphysical muscle will grow, and you'll get stronger with that. And so that will happen with any sort of development that you want to develop. Yeah, and just like an athlete, like a dancer or swimmer, if you engage in those activities of dancing and swimming, then you'll naturally give off that riff. So if you engage in debating, then you'll naturally start giving off the debating riff.
Just something to add to that, the mind is kind of designed to absorb semi-riffs from people, like see things that they like, little things they do, kind of fragments of riffs, and say, I like that, I'm adopting that in my style. It's kind of like if any of you do music, where you'll notice you kind of develop your own sound, but listening to other musicians, you're like, I like something about their swagger. I'm going to add that into mine, see how that mixes. So your own riff kind of starts out as being a collage of other riffs. So with that in mind, then the same principle applies to being able to expand your riff. It helps by actually watching other Naijis and then seeing what your body can do, not just your body, but your mojo can do, and then playing with it yourself, So you kind of take the best riffs among the collage of riffs that's out into the world, and then make them a mismatch of the best ones for whatever your style is.
To add to that, this is why collage training is so important, because and for example, in different countries of the world, why Podlair as a brand believes in freedom of information, because the ability to actually have, for example, internet access, access to music, to movies, to things of that nature, is so important, because that helps expand vastly the pantheon of riffs that your mind has to play with. So that's like the extent of the video game that you use to develop your own personal character. So collaging is important in general, but actually so is freedom of information as a principle that goes with that. Also, should be fairly obvious. Tempos. Tempos are crucial, and that's one of the many reasons we're putting it forward, is if you want to develop your riff, it's very important, for example, to have the collages, that's good, but to have real life samples you could watch. To just watch an IG that you admire, that you like their game, to just watch the way they are, hanging out in the cafeteria, just doing general stuff, to be right there with them. To also be able to interact in real time and see what they do. You know, you kind of like a certain IG, and you're like, I wonder what they would do if they did this or that. Well, if you were in tempo with them, you could ask. You just walk up and ask them questions, and then you would see how an IG whose game you admire does things. Not unlike, for example, in a sport, if you actually have an athlete who you admire in the sport that you're in, and you actually happen to be in a camp with them, you know, like a soccer camp, you can actually go over and be like, you know, I've always wondered, when a ball breaks like this, some people say you should play it this way, and other people say you should play it like this. What do you think? And that's extremely valuable mentor information, because that helps educate your riffs based on someone who is your mojo or close to it, and you admire the way they do life. Lastly, one more thing that needs to be said. This is also why your personal people pool is so important, because the phenomenon is well known, is that you will have mannerisms of your parents. Even people are like, I am nothing like my parents, and they get older and they realize, oh my gosh, I say things like them, I move my hands like them, and you do. So those that you have around you, for example, you know, your relatives and your colleagues, and pretty much things that occupy your physical and head spaces, that is going to be, first of all, determining your pantheon of things to choose from, but also it pushes on you more than, for example, collaging, because you can just put collaging down or take it up, but not your personal bubble. Those that are around you, they will push on you with the way they view life, whether they know it or not. Their expectations will go on you, and that will affect the riffs that you have available in general, just because of the buffet, but also what you personally choose. Like, even if you were, for example, as an IG, you can often have great independence of mind. Your spirits will offer you riffs to try out. But it's difficult to try a riff out because in an inclement environment. An inclement environment will make doing that hard, because you kind of have to feel a character. You kind of have to get into it, try it out, play with it. It needs to be a open, welcoming, forgiving environment for that sort of thing. So if that's not possible in the personal people pool of your life, then doing certain riffs will be quite hard. You'll have to either find new people to hang out with, or at least find places, like maybe going to a certain hobby. Like on Wednesday nights, I go and do chess, or I go and do this or that, and that's like your time to be there. And when you go and hang out at that activity with those friends, you can perhaps try on some new riffs. Just be aware of that, often doing riff training and reading in general can be quite difficult around your own personal people pool. Most people's personal people pool is not ideally suited for actually the work they need to be doing of getting enlightened. It's sad to say, but that is the truth, and it needs to be said. So I'm saying it so that you're aware.
Why is that? Is it because they're used to seeing you in a certain way, and so it's hard to diverge from that? You get different.
Good follow-up. There's several reasons for that. I'll just give a few here. Is that what you said, and a combination of another one. One is that yes, they are used to seeing you in a certain way, and generally when people do something different, there is like, there's a lag time. Even in people who live in a friendly family, unless they are very attuned to the peak pathway process, as people come more and more in line with a perfect execution of the peak pathway, the world around them, their immediate bubble, is sort of like, why are you being different? Explain yourself. So there's a burden of proof on the person, often by the bubble, of explain why you're being different now. And often when you're first trying a riff out, you don't have that kind of spiritual stature. I don't know why I like the way Christopher Walken does this, or I don't know the reason why I thought George Best was cool like this, but I maybe do, and you want to try it and see what it makes you feel like. You might not know what you're going to feel like until you try that riff out. So if you're in a place where you're going to get like, sort of like, like a bit excessive skepticism, or at least confusion. You know what I mean? Because even people know you, there has to be an acceptance environment that we're like, you're going to be growing into a new creature each day. If there's not, generally when you grow into a new creature, even if it's a better creature than you were before, the environment's like, what does this mean? what does this mean about Wednesday nights? It sounds funny. That's the usual thing. Is like, what do I have to reset now? What new? Oh, you're not like you were before. Mental effort. The first thing people generally register when you try new things out is the mental effort
that it takes to change.
So there's a lot more going on there, but I'll mention another main one, which is besides just, oh, it's different, then there's the question of, I do understand it a bit, but what I understand of the riff, I don't like the trajectory. Meaning, that riff seems to be a riff designed to do, say, this thing or that thing. And that affects me. That affects our relationship. Like perhaps you're trying a riff off that is less, say, giving. Maybe try a little more Zion, so you're not so giving when you're around a person that maybe they're not as giving as they should be. Whether they know it or not, consciously or unconsciously, when they see you developing a riff, and riffs are like characters you assume. These characters had different powers. When they see you assuming a character that has powers that's going to affect their powers, most humans, even humans who love you, quote unquote, often there is, because most humans are starving and confused, and so therefore there is a stinginess and a competitiveness. So when they see another human developing a riff that gives them more options, more capability, there can be envy, resentment. There also can be a concern that it's making you more independent, pulling you away from their sway, or that riff is going to be a riff that is going to be by its nature have an issue with them. Because certain riffs do. For example, if you develop a riff, say a gameplay style that doesn't allow, say, sloppiness in semantics, and so you develop where you like that riff. Maybe, for example, Naiji, you see Naiji where you like the fact that when it comes to semantics, they're not sloppy. So you start to take on that character yourself. If there are those in your immediate life around you who have, say, sloppy semantics, they'll start getting nervous around you, which will make, for example, the riff learning process difficult because you're going to be given sort of like the stink eye. So there's the two main ones. It's just different and new, and so I have to do more mental effort. And then there's of like, how does that affect my game? Because when you change riffs, everyone else has a riff too. And when you adjust your riffs or update them, whatever, it affects the riff they're playing. So some people really like that. Because the reason you do riffing, or you try to improve your riff, change your riff, update it, whatever, is to get better reactions in life, right? To get better advantages, to get different things to happen in the MMORPG game that is your life. But when you do that, it's kind of like, say, in Dungeons & Dragons or a game like that, when you become like a 15th level priest, you get new cool abilities that you only get for having that level of devotion to whatever pathway you're into. But what goes along with this, right, is like generally other like bad, evil monsters, they go right for you. That's the price you pay. The price you pay for actually being, like a unicorn is that trolls go right for you. But there's a good life lesson in that. You learn who around you should be around you, and you also learn who they are really. So I guess that one's first. Who they are really. As you try on new riffs, you'll discover the riffs of those in your life. Be warned, it's like mojo reading. There's a lot of shock as you realize the natures of those around you. It's very good training, but it does get into some fairly high stakes kinds of things. So there you go. In other words, are riffs something that one has to go about developing extensively, like a skill in an RPG game in a set with all their other mojo skills, or are they more of a surface phenomenon, like acting, that has to do with different ways a mojo deals with the environment independently of their development, since there are very developed people with different riffs? Or is it a mix?
To answer your question, it's actually a mixture. So there are riffs at a mazoot level. So at a surface level, you can see the differences physiologically, and the way they dress, the way they conduct themselves at a surface interface. But then you also have riffs, or you can see riffs at a conscious level, at an apparatus level. So if you see someone who is more haggard versus glowing, you'll see differences between different people that have different riffs, but because of their where their conscious the powers are at, where their apparatus is at. So at the apparatus level, what your conscious powers spend their time doing, their day doing, will manifest itself in some way. You'll see that's where the glowy versus haggard comes about. If someone spends their day doing something that's not as energizing as a riff, that's not as energizing for their conscious powers than some other riff of that same mojo, then it will show itself, it will manifest itself. And at a deeper third level, the connection with your spirit forms and with your unconscious, like with your other, with your daryu, with your fumasta, will also is also a riff, so will also manifest itself. One example that we note is with MMA fighters. So we'll note that some durams, this happens with Jinai and Naiji as well, is they'll have a more loose sort of movement, more liquidy, versus other durams who will have a more rigid, one-tracked minded kind of movement. And that's at a mazut surface level, you can see it, but it also has a deeper connection, not only because of they have different conscious powers that are working at different ratios, and that comes even from a deeper, further level from their connection with their spirit forms. In this case, we've seen that it's mostly because of their connection with their other, or lack of connection with their other. So the ones that have the more liquidy movement, it's because they're activating their they have better development of their conscious powers, but also more importantly, they have a better connection with their other, with their unconscious powers, and so they can sort of outstep and sway and they're more liquidy. Whereas with the ones that are more rigid and one-track mind, they have not as good of a connection with their other. That has to do with the risk and effort of expending energy and going for something when you don't have the connection to your other. You'll be less bold. Your soul will shrink from actually taking that challenge, or being bold, or even taking those chances with your nai and your all your powers, your ji, your zai, and your vi, because you don't have that unconscious backup. You feel like there's more. You don't have that other side covered. Like you're not communicating with that. So a lot of that seems like outside of your scope, outside of the purview, and so you won't jump at those opportunities, at those angles that other riffs other riffs who have more of a connection with their other, they'll be more bold, more adventurous, take more risks because they do have communication with those other missing powers that they don't have in their conscious. 11th Hour Infinity asks, Coach has said that the offside power can be fetishy for a lot of mojos. What are some of the ways in which an offside fetish differs from a polar fetish?
Well, all of your pod powers, aside from your source, tandem down, require the source to actually get behind them in order for them to really work. So everything except for your source kind of begins to require a sort of gearing up for each of them, which kind of gives them a certain level of intensity when you actually, that is prerequisite to actually hitting them properly. So they each kind of have a certain level of charge that it takes to get there, which increases the overall level of intensity of the fetish. So this sets the polar apart because you can only have so many polar fetishes. The number that you can have is very small because it requires a lot of life energy for you to really hit that and hit it hard. And there tends to be some hitting it and then overshooting it, so it really stands out among all the other fetishes. You could only have so many of those. Offside fetishes, on the other hand, they don't require as much intensity to get to, so you can actually afford more offside fetish slots, so to speak. And of course, with the tandem being the easiest to get to, so in fact practically second nature, because all it has to do is stimulate the source in some way. For example, the Ziny and the Nizai both have G fetishes. For the Ziny it's polar though, and for the Nizai it's offside. So the amount of putting yourself into it that actually gets you to pull off the G spell are at differing levels. So with the Nizai, that's why it kind of comes off as the more sharky energy, because they can afford to actually put a bit more play into it and use it sparingly. With the Xi Alpha though, when we get into like impassioned logician mode, then it is innately a higher level ritual to do. So there's much more seriousness in how it's taken. So then the same with the Nizai's Vi. It requires them to kind of be in a higher stakes mode to actually hit the Vi, because with the polar power, then you either hit it right or you avoid hitting it entirely. And so this is different from the Ziny's Vi, because since it's offside, then it also allows a bit more play there. So to get there, then it doesn't require as much intensity, so we can kind of afford to actually spread it around in more places.
Maseretti says, just yesterday I watched BBC's Sherlock Season 1, Episode 3, where he mentioned exactly what Coach is talking about. In the show, he seems like an IG to me, and he explains to Watson that he only remembers things that are important to do his job. Everything else is irrelevant.
Oh, that's cool. I'm glad there was a reference out there that you picked up while doing your thing. That's always cool in Polar Theory when you actually see stuff that gets enacted out, because that's what Polar Theory is about. It's like natural law principles laid out so people can play the MMORPG game of their existence better. So yeah, it's really cool. One thing to note is that we took a look at that person actually. I think it's the one you're talking about. His name is, what is it here? Benedict Cumberbatch. Me and Demons were talking just now, like that's like uber British. That's like super British. It's like they specifically made sure that they did that. In fact, it's almost like, when you play role-playing games and people have names like, Craven, Ravenloft, things like this. And so you're like, do people actually have names like that? They do. Apparently some people in England have names like that, like Benedict Cumberbatch. In fact, it's a good contender. Oh, and Benedict Cumberbatch, in case you're wondering, yes, is an IG. So you were right on that. Good guess. And he's in with good company, because most of the Sherlock Holmes haven't played by an IG. There's, of course, Robert Downey Jr., who's a Giny, so he's not. But my favorite Sherlock Holmes is Jeremy Brett, and he is an IG. And most likely, although we don't have like the best media on him, but I think Basil Rathbone is also an IG, and those are considered by a lot of people the best two ever, Jeremy Brett or Basil Rathbone. Question: it's a British fight. Who's more British? The battle of the most British name: Basil Rathbone, Benedict Cumberbatch. That's tricky.
It's
That's
tough.
toughy. I will leave it to you fans to say who is more British. Yay, see ya.